Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling a stack of your sources, articles, research, our own notes too, all focused on one single incredibly packed day, September 6th.
Right. It was one of those days where it felt like the world was spinning on, well, multiple axes at once.
Exactly. Protests on city streets, major economic shifts, international conflicts heating up. It was a lot.
It really was.
So our mission, like always, is to pull out the most important bits of knowledge, the key insights from all this material. Basically give you a shortcut to being genuinely well-informed.
And what's fascinating, I think, about focusing on just one day, September 6th here, is you start seeing the threads. How seemingly separate stories are actually, interconnected.
Yeah, like local government decisions bumping up against global supply chains.
Precisely. This day gives us a snapshot of how intertwined everything is. It reveals patterns, implications that you might miss just scanning headlines.
Okay, let's unpack this then. Looking at September 6th, one pattern that immediately jumped out from the sources was this friction. Federal power versus local autonomy,
Yeah.
right, especially around civil liberties. Where did you see that playing out most clearly?
That tension was, it was really palpable, and maybe nowhere more sharply than in Washington, D.C. On September 6th, the city saw this huge protest. Thousands marching, Meridian Hill Park to Freedom Plaza, banners saying Free D.C.
Right, that was about the federal control over policing.
Exactly. It was a direct response to the federal government imposing this month-long emergency control over D.C.'s police, deploying the National Guard, federal agents. President Trump cited crime and homelessness as the reasons.
But there was pushback on that justification, wasn't there?
Oh, absolutely. And this is where it gets really interesting. It highlights this fundamental paradox, right? D.C. residents pay federal taxes, serve in the military, but they don't have full voting representation in Congress.
And yet they're subject to this kind of federal takeover.
Precisely. City officials actually countered the administration, pointing to Justice Department stats showing violent crime was lower than during Trump's first term. So it kind of undermined that whole emergency rationale.
So it's more than just who's in charge of the police.
Much more. It's about disenfranchisement, about raw power displays in a place without full democratic voice.
Okay, that's a really stark example in D.C. Was this federal-local friction happening elsewhere that same day? Or was D.C. unique?
No, definitely not unique. That same day, September 6th, we saw very similar tensions flaring up dramatically in Chicago.
Ah, Chicago too. What happened there?
Several thousand people marched downtown, right past Trump Tower, actually. This was after the president had threatened, quote, war on the city, talked about sending in the guard. He even posted that strange Apocalypse Now parody image online.
Wow. And Chicago's a sanctuary city, right? How did that play into it?
Directly. That rhetoric collided head-on with Chicago's sanctuary stance, where local police limit cooperation with federal immigration enforcement. So the demonstrators were out there protesting planned deportation surges, but also what they saw as, political intimidation. And it was particularly sensitive timing, right around Mexican Independence Day festivities.
So the federal approach, what was the perceived impact on the ground?
Well, the view from critics and community leaders is that these aggressive tactics, they chill cooperation. People become afraid to interact with local police, even to report crimes. It destabilizes immigrant neighborhoods.
It echoes older fights over federal versus local roles.
Absolutely. It's a pattern we've seen before. Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker, he used strong language, called it wannabe dictator behavior. The White House naturally defended it as necessary for public safety.
And the communities themselves?
They weren't backing down. Leaders vowed legal challenges, mutual aid responses if the raids expanded, a real line in the sand, like you said.
So from the administration's side, the argument is law and order, security. But the pushback focuses on trust, community impact.
Yeah.
How do those get reconciled? Or do they?
That's the core of the conflict, isn't it? They often don't get reconciled easily. The administration consistently framed it as enforcing federal law, ensuring safety.
Right.
But critics argue these broad tactics have unintended consequences that actually undermine safety by destroying trust. And we saw this play out in policy, too, not just rhetoric. In Massachusetts, for instance.
What happened there?
The administration launched Operation Patriot 2.0. It was an enforcement surge targeting people ICE described as, quote, the worst of the worst criminal illegal aliens.
And that clashed with Boston's policies.
Yes, it escalated an existing legal fight between the DOJ and Boston over its sanctuary policies, specifically limiting cooperation on civil immigration detainers.
So the argument for these operations is removing dangerous individuals. What's the counter-argument based on past experience.
The counter is that past large-scale raids often sweep up many people without serious convictions. Civil rights groups consistently point this out. And the practical impact, according to the sources we looked at, is fear.
Fear that does what?
It keeps kids out of school, stops people reporting crimes, disrupts workplaces. Think about sectors like healthcare, universities, agriculture. They often rely heavily on these populations, so it's a really complex cost-benefit calculation.
And adding to this whole enforcement picture, there was news about technology, wasn't there? A contract reinstated.
Yes, that was notable. U.S. immigration agencies reinstated a contract with Paragon. That's an Israeli company known for pretty advanced phone hacking capabilities.
Phone hacking. Wow. What are the implications of bringing that kind of tool back into play?
Well, it immediately kicked off that debate again. The balance between surveillance, civil rights, immigration enforcement, civil liberties groups jumped on it, calling it a potential violation of privacy, of due process.
Especially since it had been suspended before.
Exactly. That contract was suspended under a previous administration precisely because of these concerns. So the long-term worry is further erosion of privacy, maybe a chilling effect on free speech if people worry their communications are monitored.
And it raises a question for all of us, really. How comfortable are we with these powerful surveillance tools in essentially civil immigration cases?
That's the fundamental question.
And these crackdowns, starting domestically, they actually rippled outwards, didn't they? Impacting U.S. allies.
Absolutely. The global reach became very clear. Look at South Korea.
What happened with South Korea?
Seoul lodged a formal protest over a U.S. immigration raid at a Hyundai car battery plant. Hundreds of South Korean nationals were arrested there. The issue was work authorization.
And the reaction in South Korea.
Strong. President Lee Jae-myung ordered an, quote, all-out response. It highlights just how serious the diplomatic implications were.
So if we connect the dots there.
It really shows that delicate balance, doesn't it, between, say, rapid industrial expansion like building EV plants and workplace oversight and maintaining good international relations. These incidents don't just affect people. They can snarl supply chains, strain alliances.
Even when both countries, like the U.S. and South Korea, are actively trying to build up those EV jobs and tech sectors.
Exactly. Actions here can have pretty immediate economic and political fallout over there.
Now, these questions about protest rights, state power, we saw them in the U.S., but they were also echoing across the Atlantic, right?
Yeah.
London, September 6th, another big confrontation.
Major one, yes. In London, police arrested nearly 900 people. 900. At a rally in Parliament Square.
900. Why so many?
The protesters were defying a ban on a group called Palestine Action. This group uses direct action against companies linked to the Israeli military, and they'd been prescribed under the UK's Terrorism Act. The protesters had signs like, I oppose genocide, I support Palestine Action.
So the scale of the arrest, that's huge.
It's staggering, and it immediately ignited this fierce debate. Protest rights versus counter-terror powers. Civil liberties groups warned about a serious chilling effect on political speech, especially speech related to the Israel-Gaza conflict.
And the fallout.
Well, that many arrests almost guarantee extensive legal challenges, parliamentary questions. It really tests the limits of free expression when national security concerns are invoked. It's a global theme. Really, how much dissent can a state tolerate? When does dissent become a perceived threat?
Okay, shifting gears a bit, away from those domestic and transnational disputes. September 6th also saw major developments in ongoing international conflicts.
Yes, unfortunately, conflict was a big part of the picture that day. The Israel-Gaza war, it's grinding into its second year now since the Hamas attacks of October 7th, 2023.
What were the specific developments on the 6th?
The Israeli army issued new evacuation orders for parts of Gaza City. They also struck a high-rise tower, claiming it was used by Hamas. Officials were quite explicit. The military's objective was to capture Gaza City, and they urged civilians to flee south.
And the humanitarian situation.
Deeply concerning. International agencies were already warning parts of Gaza are in famine. Aid groups were criticizing these relocations, arguing people are being funneled into overcrowded so-called safe zones that lack basics, food, water, shelter. It's dire.
Meanwhile, diplomatic efforts, hostages.
U.S. officials described being engaged in, quote, very deep negotiations regarding the remaining hostages. That term, very deep, suggests, really complex talks, likely involving intermediaries, difficult trade-offs happening behind the scenes. All this amidst growing public frustration inside Israel and huge international pressure.
And Ukraine. Also a significant escalation that day.
It certainly was. Kyiv was warning about intensifying Russian strikes. At the same time, President Zelensky was highlighting Ukraine's own efforts, touting a nearly 60% rise in domestic arms production as part of their long-term strategy.
But the immediate threat was very real.
Terrifyingly real. Overnight, going into September 7th, Russia launched what was described as its largest air attack of the war up to that point. It even set part of the Ukrainian cabinet building on fire right in Kyiv.
Wow. And the international reaction?
So
NATO's?
swift, unified. NATO scrambled jets to patrol over Eastern Europe, reinforcing air defenses for those neighboring countries.
So a defensive move, but also a message.
Absolutely. It powerfully underlined NATO's commitment to collective defense, a clear signal to Moscow about the alliance's resolve and readiness.
And tragically, the human cost of these deployments was also highlighted that day, wasn't it? With the news from Latvia.
Yes, that was sobering news. A Canadian Armed Forces member was found dead in Latvia, where NATO has a significant presence as part of that reassurance mission.
A stark reminder.
It really is. And it immediately brought back discussions about the risks of these overseas deployments, and crucially, about the mental well-being of troops serving in these high-stress zones. It forces a conversation about the human toll behind the geopolitics, especially with the conflict raging so nearby.
Okay, let's pivot now from those geopolitical tensions to the economy, the global markets, the infrastructure supporting it all. This next bit has some pretty direct implications for, well, for your bottom line.
Indeed. And the big economic news in the U.S. on September 6th was the August jobs report.
What did it show?
A clear slowdown. Only 22,000 non-farm payroll jobs added, and unemployment actually ticked up to 4.3%. That's nearly a four-year high.
So the labor market is definitely cooling. What does that mean for, say, the Fed interest rates?
Well, it immediately shifted expectations. Traders started pricing in a bigger interest rate cut from the Federal Reserve in September. Some strategists were even saying a half percentage point cut, 50 basis points, was suddenly back on the table. That wasn't the consensus just weeks before.
And for regular households?
It's tough. You've got slower hiring combined with prices that are still stubbornly high, still sticky. That combination really threatens consumer confidence heading into the fall. And it makes the Fed's job harder, that balancing act between supporting jobs and finally taming inflation.
A tricky spot for the Fed. Adding to that economic uncertainty, there was this major trade battle developing, right? About tariffs.
Yes, a big one. A federal appeals court had just ruled, the week before, that most of those Trump-era reciprocal tariffs were unlawful. These were levied under a specific emergency law, the 1977 IEPA.
Okay, so the administration's response.
They immediately went to the Supreme Court asking for an expedited ruling. They warned that if these tariffs are struck down, existing trade deals might have to be, quote, unwound.
Unwound, that sounds significant. What are the potential costs?
Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent was pretty blunt. He said a loss could force tens of billions of dollars in refunds, potentially half of all the tariffs collected under this administration.
Wow, that's huge uncertainty. How's it affecting things now?
It's already ditching investment. Manufacturing, retail, other sectors, they're hesitant. And analysts are suggesting that even if the administration loses at the Supreme Court, they might just try using different legal authorities to achieve similar goals. So it signals prolonged trade friction, continued volatility for businesses and consumers, really, regardless of the outcome.
Okay. Elsewhere in the economy, energy markets. OPEC plus sources.
Yes, some signals emerged from OPEC plus sources. It sounded like an in-principle agreement to raise oil output again in October.
A big increase.
Probably not. Likely a smaller bump than they'd done in recent months. Makes sense. As the summer driving season ends, demand typically cools off a bit.
And oil prices, where have they been?
Hovering in the mid-$60 per barrel range. So a modest production increase could give consumers a little relief at the gas pump. But it might also squeeze revenues for the oil producers themselves. That makes the internal politics within OPEC, plus, deciding who cuts or adds how much, pretty sensitive. Especially since most of the spare capacities with Saudi Arabia and the UAE, it's always a careful balancing act for them.
Right. Now, shifting to something absolutely vital, something we all rely on but maybe don't think about enough, undersea cables. There was major disruption on September 6th.
Massive disruption. It started in the Red Sea. 5 more undersea fiber optic cables were damaged or cut on that day. 5.
5 more on top of previous incidents.
Exactly. And this degraded internet service for millions of people across the Middle East, East Africa, parts of Asia. Just imagine the chaos when the internet slows down or cuts out for that many people.
It really underscores our vulnerability, doesn't it?
Totally. And connecting it to the bigger picture, it immediately brings back these crucial debates. Do we have enough redundancy in our global internet? What about maritime security? Is it wise to cluster so much vital infrastructure in a conflict-prone area like the Red Sea?
And businesses feel this immediately.
Oh, yeah. Fintech, cloud services, you name it. They were reminded, again, of the huge cost of having these single points of failure in the internet's global nervous system. For you listening, it means distant conflicts or accidents can literally slow down your work, your communication, your access to services.
It makes the world feel very connected and very fragile.
Mm.
But amidst those vulnerabilities, there was also news about innovation, right? Especially concerning a critical resource, water.
Yes, a potentially hopeful development. Scientists are talking more seriously about tapping vast freshwater reserves found beneath the seafloor.
Under the ocean, fresh water.
Exactly. Apparently, there are significant aquifers offshore in various parts of the world. Pilot projects, like in California and the Middle East, are showing it might actually be feasible to extract this secret offshore fresh water. They're looking at wells drilled from the shore or maybe from platforms.
That sounds amazing. Other downsides?
Yeah.
Risks.
Naturally, experts are cautious. Overpumping could draw seawater into the freshwater aquifer, contaminating it, or it could damage marine ecosystems. So strict monitoring and probably limited careful use would be essential.
But the potential.
If it's scaled prudently, responsibly, it could be another tool in the toolbox for coastal areas facing water shortages, a complement to conservation, recycling, desalination, maybe a flexible buffer against drought for coastal cities. It's intriguing.
Definitely something to watch.
Okay.
Let's round out our deep dive for September 6th. Looking at stories that hit a bit closer to home, things affecting public trust, culture, daily life.
Right. And a major one was the pressure mounting on the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC.
What was happening there on the 6th?
It was quite extraordinary. You had the Director General of the World Health Organization, the WHO, publicly urging Americans to, quote, protect the CDC.
The head of the WHO, wow.
Yeah. And on the same day, major U.S. medical groups jointly called for the resignation of the Health Secretary, Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
So what's the underlying concern driving this?
The core concern, crystallized that day, was that political interference and infighting are seriously eroding our essential public health capabilities. Critics pointed to specific harms, things like anti-vaccine rhetoric, instances of interference with the CDC's scientific work.
And the danger of that erosion.
Public health experts warn that when trust weakens, it slows down our response to future outbreaks. It can undermine routine vaccination efforts, compromise the disease surveillance systems we rely on. For you, the listener, it ultimately means a country less prepared for health threats and potentially less access to reliable, unbiased health information.
A serious issue of trust. Okay, in a totally different sphere, a cultural development. The Catholic Church made history on September 6th.
Yes, a very modern moment for, an ancient institution. Pope Francis canonized Carlo Acutis. He was a teenage computer enthusiast.
Computer whiz saint.
Pretty much. It marks the first time someone clearly from the digital age, our era, became a saint. Acutis died young, back in 2006, aged 15. He'd used his computer skills to build websites documenting religious miracles. Some called him God's influencer.
That's quite a description. What's the thinking behind this canonization?
Well, it seems clearly aimed at bridging tradition with modern life, maybe inspiring young people, connecting with digital natives. But like many changes, it also sparked some internal debate within the church about the pace of change, the criteria. It highlights that ongoing effort to stay relevant in a tech-driven world.
Interesting. Now, something less controllable. The weather. Nature was putting on quite a show across the U.S. on September 6th.
It really was a dramatic day. Millions of people were under severe weather alerts.
What kind of events?
All sorts. Torrential rain in the Northeast causing flash floods, neighborhoods submerged. Out west, wildfires raging in California, forcing evacuations, burning huge areas. And then out in the Pacific, Hurricane Kiko intensified into a major Category 3 storm, threatening Hawaii.
Just a barrage of extreme events.
Exactly, and it immediately led to renewed calls for more robust climate adaptation strategies. Experts increasingly link the frequency and severity of these kinds of disasters to climate change.
Sparking debate about preparedness.
Yes. Are our infrastructure, our emergency response systems adequate? Many were arguing for more investment in resilience, trying to protect communities from what really feels like a new, more dangerous normal. For people in those affected areas, it's not abstract news, it's a direct threat.
Absolutely. And finally, let's end on a number, a truly mind-boggling number from the financial world that day.
Yes, the one that probably got the most headlines, the Powerball jackpot. Two tickets won, and the prize was $1.787 billion. Billion with the B. One of the biggest ever in the U.S.
Incredible amount of money. Beyond the lucky winners, what does a jackpot that size make us think about?
Well, while lottery officials always talk about the revenue going to good causes, like education.
Right. That's the justification.
Economists often point out that lotteries tend to function as a kind of regressive voluntary tax, meaning lower-income groups often spend a disproportionately larger share of their income on tickets.
Yeah.
So a massive payout like this inevitably renews scrutiny. It forces us to look at the social costs of gambling addiction issues, predatory marketing, and it raises that bigger question. Should states rely so heavily on lottery revenue for essential public services? It's an economic lifeline for state budgets, sure, but it can be a real drain on individuals and communities, a complex issue.
What a day indeed, September 6th. From protests in D.C. and London against government actions to active war zones in Gaza and Ukraine, these invisible battles over our internet cables, and even the trust in vital institutions like the CDC.
It really shows the connections, doesn't it? We've seen how local protests can tie into international trade, how failures in infrastructure thousands of miles away can hit global markets, affect your daily life, how institutions struggle for trust when politics gets intense.
So what's the takeaway?
For me, it's a powerful reminder that every single day weaves this incredibly complex tapestry of events. Each thread is connected, revealing these larger forces shaping our world in ways we might not always see immediately.
Hopefully this deep dive has given you, our listener, a more nuanced feel for that single day, September 6th, and crucially, those connections between the events.
Yeah, and maybe something to think about. Based on everything we discussed today, those federal-local clashes, the global conflicts, the vulnerable infrastructure, the trust issues, consider this. In this incredibly interconnected, globally influenced world, how much control do individuals, do local communities really have over the massive forces shaping their lives? What stands out to you about where real power seems to lie today? And where might individuals and communities actually find some leverage in this complex landscape?
Something to ponder. Until our next deep dive.